Joel Anand Samy, who is the host of America's Roundtable radio program, and also co-founder of International Leaders Summit, does a great job. And Joel, it's a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you so very, very much. Man, there are a lot of things.
It's great to be with you all.
A lot of things going on here, but we had some votes in Congress. People are getting a little upset one way or the other. But your overview of the current status of what's going on in Israel as far as Hamas is concerned.
Yes, indeed. We have to remember what happened on October 7, Paul. And in fact, we were with you just a few days right after October 7, if I remember correctly. And since then, we know that over 1,200 people died, 6,900 Israelis were injured, 240 hostages taken. And in fact, some of the hostages have been released. And it was the single worst day, and the single worst day as far as the loss of life for Israel since the Holocaust. And as we see what's happening today, Israel is entering its third phase in the southern Gaza region, and working to root out Hamas. But the reports we're seeing and hearing about, Paul, is so disturbing. The manner in which women were raped and killed, babies were killed. We have to remember that because, unfortunately, institutions in America, the United Nations, are not even willing to admit that these atrocities took place.
What is your take when you see this happening across America, specifically at the university level, in some of these marches out there and some of these people involved? It's almost to the point where you want to get them and shake them and say, do you understand what side you're on, and do you understand what you are advocating for? But
absolutely, yes.
It seems to me that that all of the rotten stuff that's been building up over the decades is beginning to spill over at the university level and some of the indoctrination.
Yes, Paul, it's very disturbing and very upsetting as we see universities across America actually take the side of Hamas. Can you imagine if this happened on just the days after September 11 for us, 9/11 for us, if universities came in support of Al-Qaeda? And that's exactly what they're doing. They're supporting a terrorist organization, not the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian people are also held hostage by Hamas. And in fact, when you think about this here, Israel actually faces a existential threat right now. And it's not just only Hamas, but it's Iran. And unfortunately, students, the academia that we're seeing, they don't understand history. They don't understand what's really happening in the Middle East. And that's very unfortunate indeed.
And how it has implications across the entire globe. They don't understand that.
Absolutely. If the West is not able to communicate moral clarity, then we are in trouble indeed. Israel is a country that stands for the rule of law, protection of property rights. It's the only democratic state in the Middle East and a strong U.S. ally. And America has an opportunity to stand strong with allies. However, the Biden administration is now pressuring Israel to actually draw down its efforts in Gaza, and also calling for a ceasefire. Can you imagine if that was asked of America, to have a ceasefire when we were going after Osama bin Laden?
To also a point, to go back to the 9/11 analogy that you made, Joel, is that we had some high school kids. I say high school and college. And I guess they were trying to get attention to them for themselves or what, but talking about the 9/11 and who was the real culprit there. And that shocked a lot of people to actually hear, especially in New York, to actually hear high schoolers taking the sides of Al-Qaeda back then, or the terrorists. I'm glad that kind of shut off. But it hasn't. Some of the weirdness hasn't, from even the White House. I don't know if you heard Kamala Harris, who I think she's trying to be relevant in the story, but she said this just recently.
5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza.
Now catch these now. These are the 5 principles, and I guess from the White House.
5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza. no forcible displacement, no reoccupation, no siege or blockade, no reduction in territory, and no use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism. We want to see a unified Gaza and West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. And Palestinian voices and aspirations must be at the center of this work.
Now, I have to ask you, politically, why would she even say that? Is that an admonition or a threat or guidance for Netanyahu? Why would you go out and list those 5 principles? Is Israel violating any of that or what?
Well, it's unfortunate that politicians and policymakers have a dearth of understanding when it comes to what's going on in Israel and its neighbors. In fact, the Palestinian Authority is one of the most corrupt entities that we know of. And it is not governing what is known as the West Bank, also known Judea and Samaria. And it is unfortunate that they even haven't had an election for over 10 years now. So as far as these guiding principles that Vice President Kamala Harris is talking about, it may be something that is being pushed from within the White House or the State Department, but the realities on the ground are so different. Israel cannot relinquish the security of that region to the Palestinian Authority or to whomever comes up within Gaza, because it would be like us in the United States having on the Mexican U.S.-Mexico border a group of terrorists that are constantly threatening the U.S. side and constantly sending in rockets. Yeah. And we would not stand for it, and neither can Israel. And Israel needs, Israel is looking at it from a whole different perspective. The concept, the idea, the notion of a two-state solution, I think that's gone down the drain. There is no way that you can hand over the security apparatus to terrorist groups or groups that do not know how to govern. And that's a serious issue that will have to be looked upon.
Yeah. Do you think this, you hear a lot of people saying this, that the catalyst for this, the genesis of all of this, was basically when Joe Biden decided to cut a deal with Iran and the billions of dollars return. And it was kind of a signal that Hamas could do what they. Do you buy into that story?
In fact, we have seen this across the globe. When the Biden administration came in, the only thing that they should have done is nothing. They should have allowed the Abraham Accords to flourish. They should not have eased up on the sanctions that were in effect, really crippling Iran. And when we see what's happening in the Middle East, Iran is the main culprit. And it's using proxies like the Hamas, the Houthis, and also in Syria. They have their own militants there, in Iraq, and the Hezbollah. Iran is the main culprit, and they're attacking U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has been very weak in responding. It's pinprick strikes to their attacks on our U.S. bases where there's U.S. servicemen and women. So we certainly need stronger leadership from the White House. And in fact, they should certainly start taking out Iranian facilities. Perhaps an oil refinery would send a very clear message that America is serious when American naval vessels are being attacked in the Red Sea or on the Red Sea. So these are serious concerns for security in the region.
We always wonder, and history will tell us when we are the weakest, people understand this around the world. And I think you're seeing that now probably on steroids like never before. As a matter of fact, if you want things to worry about, is the misguided foreign policy of this guy, who's been the greatest failure in American history in foreign policy, and he happens to be now the commander-in-chief. You'll love this cut.
Then we'll have something that we don't seek. Well, we've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory. Then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO.
How's that make you feel? American troops. And by the way, if that should happen, and we'll continue this conversation on the other side, but if that should happen, with the enlistment into the armed forces at an all-time low, I don't know what else you're going to do but the draft. So all of you people who sit on the other side don't think this affects you, you better start thinking about it. The President of the United States of America talking about NATO and protecting when we got two wars going on full speed. Back with Joel and more coming up. That ought to be the theme song of everybody that has to endured the Biden administration cuckoo, Stephen Wilson Jr. Back with Joel of America's Roundtable. And I was talking about several different things, but when you start looking at there's another story on the news this morning, and looking at the tension that is in the world, not only from Russia, but this is December the 7th and the 82nd year after Pearl Harbor. There's one report there that says some studies have said that China may be looking at us and how weak we are. They understand that a Pearl Harbor type attack on the United States of America would render us no longer a superpower, and we may not be able to defend ourselves or respond back if China decided to attack first. Then you have the other side of this. China depends on us as far as economically concerned, but you don't know if they would act on that or not. But the world is a much more dangerous place than it was just 3 years ago under Trump.
Absolutely, Paul. And in fact, the policies that were being advanced by, for example, President Ronald Reagan and President Donald J. Trump was peace through strength. It wasn't peace through weakness or peace through cowardice, but peace through strength. And unfortunately, what we do not see coming out of the White House is statements and actions that follow the statements. We are trying to present unfortunately, the Biden administration has presented a very weak America. That began when we saw the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And we also gave up the Bagram Air Base, too. A lot of things have transpired. We sent the wrong signals to President Putin. In fact, we were packing everything up at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. That basically gave the green light to the Russians to say, you can come right on in. And we did not stand strong at that time for us, with our partners. And unfortunately, as Biden has done in regard to what China is observing today, China is observing a very weak America. And this will certainly impact us on the long term. And peace through strength really matters more than ever before. And that's the policy that has been very successful. Yeah. And that's why President Trump, actually, there were no new wars started.
Joel, what does it look like? What does Gaza look like, though, in terms of how you prevent this in the future? Because the more autonomy they get without oversight from Israel one way or the other is going to have Hamas pour back in there. And I often use the example about Sicily and the mafia. It's just hard. How do you root that out? You could say the same thing about Mexico and the cartel. How do you find a situation without some oversight on Israel's part that's going to prevent this from the future?
Yeah. There are actually two theaters of operation when we look at it. One is Gaza, and that's what Israel is doing right now, is basically working to eliminate the Hamas terrorists and other networks that are there, other terror networks. It's going to be a long-term endeavor. Unfortunately, the Biden administration wants Israel to sort of finish up the project, as they are saying, by January. Well, it took us years to get rid of Al-Qaeda, and then it took us years to get rid of ISIS. These are terrorist networks. It takes time. And talking about the form of government that may come out of Gaza, it has to be a government a regional administration that meets the needs of the people within Gaza. But the security apparatus, security must be controlled by Israel. Otherwise, this is going to happen again. The second theater of operation is what Iran is doing. And that's where America plays a vital role, and European nations, because even Hamas and other terror groups are threatening European capitals and also our country as well. So Iran needs to really get a strong message that we're not going to tolerate this here. actions speak louder than words in that specific region.
I'm interested in this. How is the influence from Iran changed after the attack as far as Hezbollah is concerned? Is it more integrated in is that the next firebox? What happens there?
Well, as we all know, Iran is the state sponsor of terrorism. They fund Hezbollah, they fund Hamas, they fund the Houthis that are attacking U.S. naval ships there at the moment. So Iran is the main culprit. And if we do not address this situation, it is going to impact us directly. In fact, the FBI has mentioned about terrorists and possibly coming through the southern border.
Yes. Well, that and Chinese. We have more stories about the Chinese also infiltrating the southern border, and intentionally so, and they're not looking for migrant working jobs either. Looking forward to the weekend and the next program from America's Roundtable, a hit show from Joel Anand Samy, and we thank you so very much for taking the time. Have a great weekend, sir.
Thank you so much, Paul, and have a great weekend as well.
Same.